I'm Madeline Carter, 26. I was raised in a mansion where every chandelier sparkled, every smile was rehearsed, and every act of love came with a condition. When my grandfather Henry passed away, he left me the entire Carter estate, valued at over $10 million. But my parents and sister forged documents, called me unstable, and dragged me out of our home by my hair. They thought I'd vanish quietly. But grandfather had planned for this. He left behind a hidden message, a digital trail, proof of everything, and I was about to burn down the paper castle they'd built from lies. Before I show you how I turned the $10 million betrayal into a legacy of truth, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever had to fight for what was already yours. I grew up in a house so large it had echoing halls, velvet-curtained parlors no one ever used, and windows that looked out onto acres of sculpted gardens in Silverfield, Massachusetts. From the outside, it resembled a dream, one of those estate homes you'd expect to see in glossy magazines or historical documentaries. Inside, though, was a silence I learned to live with early on. My parents, Elaine and Richard Carter, were pillars of the community. They hosted charity galas, chaired museum boards, and were always featured in the society pages. They knew how to smile for cameras, how to make gracious speeches, how to command a room. But behind closed doors, they were distant, distracted, and, when it came to me, almost indifferent. Their attention was reserved entirely for my older sister, Lillian. She was radiant, they said. Brilliant, they insisted. Lillian, with her golden hair and easy charm, was the center of every family photograph, every dinner toast, every whispered hope for the Carter legacy. At 16, she received a white convertible with a red bow tied to the hood. I got a gift card and a reminder to be grateful for the gesture. When she failed chemistry, they hired 2 private tutors and blamed the school. When I brought home straight A's, my father didn't look up from his phone. My mother nodded vaguely and said, "That's what we expect of you, Madeline." There was no shouting, no violence, no dramatic cruelty, just a steady, quiet erasure. Lillian knew the power she held. She'd borrow my clothes without asking, returning them stained or torn. She invited my friends to parties and told them I'd chosen not to come. Once, she stole the college essay I had spent months perfecting and submitted it under her name. My mother called it a misunderstanding. My father told me to stop stirring up drama. I learned that in the Carter household. Image always mattered more than truth. Lillian's mistakes were explained away as sensitivities. Mine were evidence of poor character. But not everyone was blind. My grandfather, Henry Carter, lived in the east wing of the estate. A self-made man who built Carter Holdings from the ground up. He was already semi-retired when I was born. And yet, despite his age, he saw me. There's my sharp-eyed girl. He'd greet me with a warm smile and a glint in his eye. Every Saturday, we sailed his old yacht, the Eleanor, on Miller's Bay. He taught me to steer into the wind, to respect the sea's mood, to read a map with precision and patience. Life doesn't always move in a straight line, he'd tell me, guiding the wheel with weathered hands. Sometimes you have to tack hard to reach the place you're meant to be. On rainy weekends, he took me to museums and libraries. He answered my endless questions with care and never once told me I was too much, too quiet, or too intense. He told me I had a mind for strategy, that one day, the future of the Carter legacy might rest with me. In that vast, cold house, where my voice often echoed back unheard. Henry Carter was the only one who truly listened. The only one who saw not just who I was, but who I could become. It started with fatigue. Then came the weight loss, the bruises that took too long to fade, the cough that wouldn't go away. At first, grandfather brushed it off. He was just getting older, he said. But I knew something wasn't right, and by the time the doctors confirmed it, late-stage pancreatic cancer. The silence in our home turned from cold to heavy. My parents reacted the way they always did, with distance wrapped in decorum. They scheduled consultations with top specialists, arranged transport to Boston for a second opinion, and made sure the family's PR firm had a statement ready. But none of that changed the diagnosis. 6 months, maybe 8, they said. If we were lucky. Lillian showed up to the hospital twice. Once with a latte she never gave him, too busy scrolling through her phone. And once because my mother demanded she make an appearance for the sake of optics. She left after 15 minutes. I stayed. I moved into the East Wing, setting up a small cot beside grandfather's room. I coordinated his medications, spoke with the palliative care team, and kept track of his schedule when no one else remembered. I read aloud from his favorite biographies when his eyes were too tired to focus. I played recordings of the sea, soft and rhythmic. When he couldn't sleep, those final months became a strange kind of gift, one built in pain. Yes, but also in closeness. We talked for hours, sometimes about business, sometimes about philosophy, and sometimes about nothing at all. I remember one night, as rain tapped against the glass and the house had fallen into its usual hush. He reached for my hand. "Madeline," he whispered, his voice more gravel than breath. "Do you know why I always called you the sharp-eyed girl?" I smiled. "Because I asked too many questions." He gave a faint chuckle. "Because you saw things others missed. You saw the cracks beneath the surface. And you never stopped looking." He paused, struggling to gather strength for the next sentence. "Not everyone values integrity the way you do. And not everyone sees the true worth of things." I squeezed his hand gently, holding back tears. "Please don't talk like this. You're still here. We must talk like this," he insisted. "Because when I'm gone, they will try to twist everything. They will say I wasn't thinking clearly, that you put these ideas in my head. But you and I know the truth." I nodded slowly, my throat too tight to speak. "I've made arrangements," he continued. "And I've left you something, in case things don't unfold as they should." "What kind of something?" I asked. "You'll know when it's time," he said. "Just remember to look. Look carefully." He turned his head to face me fully, his gaze sharp despite the dim light. "You must promise me, Madeline. Promise me that no matter what they say, no matter what they do, you will stand your ground." "I promise," I whispered. His next words were barely audible, drifting like smoke into the dark. "I will always protect you, even when I'm gone." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat beside him and watched the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest, knowing that each breath might be the last. And when morning came, his eyes remained closed. His hand, still wrapped in mine, had grown cold. They held a memorial 2 days later, a grand affair filled with silk dresses, long speeches, and guests who barely knew the man he truly was. Lillian cried for the cameras. My parents accepted condolences with practiced grief. But I sat in silence near the back, my head bowed not in performance, but in mourning. He was gone. But his words weren't. Somewhere, hidden beneath the layers of wealth and legacy, past the marble halls and crystal chandeliers, was the message he'd left me. A promise embedded in something small, maybe even invisible to the rest. And I would find it. When the time came, I would know where to look. 1 week after the funeral, the air in Silverfield had turned colder, though not from the weather. The Carter estate, once humming with staff and rehearsed hospitality, fell into an eerie stillness. There were no more guests, no more flowers, just a lingering quiet that pressed against the windows like fog. That morning, we were summoned to the library, the dark wood-paneled walls, once my grandfather's sanctuary of strategy and solitude, now felt heavy, almost watching. The family lawyer, Daniel Whitmore, waited at the head of the long table, briefcase precisely placed before him. He greeted us with a polite nod, though his eyes flicked too often toward my parents. Lillian sauntered in wearing black silk and diamonds, her grief long replaced by expectation. My parents arrived just behind her, Elaine with perfectly applied mascara, Richard with the familiar scent of expensive cologne and calculation. I took a seat at the far end of the table, where grandfather used to sit during Sunday chess matches. It still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco. Daniel cleared his throat. "We are here for the formal reading of Mr. Henry Carter's last will and testament, executed 6 months prior to his passing and witnessed by 2 legal parties." A hush settled over the room. He began with the minor items, paintings, keepsakes, a few personal gifts to longtime staff. Then, in a measured tone, he continued, "To my granddaughter, Madeline Carter, I leave my controlling interest in Carter Holdings, comprising 62% of all outstanding shares, as well as the full deed to the Carter estate and its attached properties. I make this decision in recognition of her integrity, intellect, and unwavering dedication to our family's future." My breath caught. "To my granddaughter, Lillian Carter, I leave a trust fund sufficient for comfort and dignity. Specific terms have been outlined in a separate document." Lillian blinked. "To my son Richard and daughter-in-law Elaine, I leave personal items of sentimental value: the Steinway piano from the West Parlor, the oil portrait commissioned in 1984, and selected furnishings from the guest wing." Silence. I didn't dare move. I could feel Lillian's eyes on me, sharp, disbelieving. My mother's hands had frozen on the armrest, knuckles white beneath polished skin. My father's jaw shifted once, then locked in place. "This can't be right," my mother whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. "Henry must have revised." There was no revision. Daniel interrupted gently. "This is the final and legally binding version of Mr. Carter's will." Lillian stood abruptly. "So she gets everything. The company, the house, the legacy. And I get what, a consolation prize." Daniel adjusted his glasses. "Your trust is substantial, Miss Carter. Your grandfather made sure of that." "But not control," she hissed. I sat frozen in place. Not because I was ungrateful, but because the weight of it, the magnitude, was suddenly crushing. I had known grandfather believed in me, but to entrust me with everything he built, that was more than belief. It was a legacy. From the corner of my eye, I noticed the exchange of glances, my father to Daniel, then a faint, imperceptible nod. Daniel cleared his throat again. "Of course, there will be a transition period. Certain legal formalities need to be addressed in the coming weeks." His tone had changed, less formal now, more calculated. And just like that, the air in the room shifted. I had entered the library as the quiet granddaughter who used to sit cross-legged by the fireplace with a book. I was leaving it as the legal heir to Carter Holdings and the estate that bore our name. And from the look on my parents' faces, that shift was not only unexpected, it was unacceptable. The silence following the reading wasn't just awkward, it was a warning. In the days that followed the will reading, the Carter estate no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage being dismantled behind velvet curtains. The air was thick with something unspoken, a quiet unraveling that moved through the halls like fog. At first, it was subtle. Doors that had always remained open were suddenly closed. Conversations stopped the moment I walked into a room. Staff who used to greet me with warmth now offered stiff nods and avoided eye contact. I'd grown up in this house invisible, but this was different. This wasn't neglect. It was exclusion. When I asked my mother if something was wrong, she offered a brittle smile. "We're just adjusting," she said, waving one manicured hand, the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, one of the few items grandfather had left her, caught the morning light. Grief manifests in many forms. Lillian, once openly dismissive, had transformed overnight into the perfect daughter. She brought my parents their morning coffee, joined my mother for charity meetings, and sat beside my father in the study, pretending to ask for advice. But her eyes never softened when they looked at me. If anything, they sharpened, watchful, condescending. "Enjoying your temporary throne," she whispered one evening as we passed each other in the hallway. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Later that week, I went to grandfather's study, my study now, to begin sorting through his files. But the bookshelves were half empty, and the desk drawers had been cleared. Important documents that I knew had been meticulously kept in the safe were nowhere to be found. I confronted my father that evening during dinner. "The documents from grandfather's safe are missing. His business notes, estate files, everything." He didn't even look up from his plate. "Daniel needed a few things for probate review," he said flatly. "Nothing to worry about." But I was worried. That night, I passed by his office and heard voices behind the closed door. "We need to fix Henry's mistake before it's too late," my mother said, her tone sharp and urgent. "I'm handling it," my father replied. "Daniel says there are options." The next morning, I asked them directly, "Are you trying to contest the will?" My father set down his coffee with careful precision. "Don't be paranoid. Madeline, this is exactly why your grandfather should have made more reasonable arrangements. You're not prepared for this kind of responsibility." My mother nodded, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "You've been under a lot of stress. Maybe you should speak with Dr. Melton. He helped me through some difficult transitions, gaslighting, perfectly rehearsed and flawlessly delivered." I called Samantha that night, my voice low and trembling. "Something feels wrong. They're planning something. I can feel it." She didn't hesitate. "Madeline, you know your family better than anyone. If your gut says something's off, it probably is. Can you check what's missing?" The next morning, I returned to the study and opened the safe. It was empty. Only the velvet lining remained, like a stage after the curtain falls. That afternoon, I reached out to someone I hadn't seen in months. Patricia Lang, my grandfather's longtime assistant who had retired just before his diagnosis. We met at a quiet coffee shop in town. She looked thinner, more anxious than I remembered. "I can't say much," she said, stirring her untouched latte. "But your grandfather was afraid this might happen. That's why he was so careful." "What do you mean?" I pressed. "Careful how he knew they might try to contest the will. He told me he had a plan, just in case. But if they're already moving, you need to be very, very careful." I leaned in closer, contesting on what grounds. Patricia hesitated, then lowered her voice. "They're going to say he wasn't of sound mind, that you manipulated him." The words hung in the air like smoke. She stood up abruptly. "I shouldn't have said anything. Watch your back, Madeline. They have more power than you think." She left cash on the table and hurried out, leaving her coffee untouched and my heart pounding. That night, I sat alone in my room, the walls of the estate closing in like a vice. The inheritance wasn't just under attack, so was the truth, and I was beginning to understand just how far my family was willing to go to rewrite it. 3 weeks after the reading of the will, I was summoned to the dining room for a family meeting. The message came from Mr. Fletcher, our longtime butler, whose voice, once warm, now carried a strange stiffness. He avoided my eyes as he delivered it. That was the first warning. I entered the room cautiously. The polished mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier's glow. My parents sat at one end, flanked by Daniel Whitmore and a man I didn't recognize. Lillian was already there, seated quietly with a composed, unreadable expression. "Please sit," my father said curtly, gesturing to the chair across from them. I hesitated, then obeyed. Daniel cleared his throat. "Madeline, we've uncovered some concerning information regarding your grandfather's mental state in his final weeks." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were charts, notes, an alleged medical assessment suggesting cognitive decline due to Henry's illness and medications. "And there's this," he continued, placing another sheet on top. "A letter, supposedly written by your grandfather, expressing concern that you had been manipulating him during his illness and requesting a review of any changes to the will made during that period." My chest tightened. "This is absurd," I said quietly. "That's not even his handwriting. It's been verified by independent experts." Daniel replied smoothly. "What experts?" I shot back. "People on your payroll, Madeline," my mother interjected, voice soaked in false sympathy. "We know this is difficult, but the facts are clear. Your grandfather wasn't himself." My father didn't soften his tone. "We've already filed a motion. The courts have granted a temporary stay on the transfer of assets, pending a full investigation." I turned to Lillian, searching her face. She offered a rehearsed frown and spoke carefully. "I didn't want it to happen like this. I told them we should just split everything. I tried to protect you. The lie was so clean. It cut. You've been planning this since the day the will was read." I whispered. "That kind of paranoid thinking," the unknown man interrupted, "is exactly what concerns us." "And you are?" I asked, eyes narrowing. "Dr. Melton," he replied, "medical consultant retained by the family. I've been asked to monitor your well-being." There it was. The trap. My father straightened his posture. "In light of the current legal uncertainty and your increasingly unstable behavior, we've made a decision. You'll need to vacate the estate. Immediately." My breath caught. "You're kicking me out." My mother stood, her expression cold and final. "As long as the estate remains under legal dispute, we have the right to determine who resides here. And you, Madeline, no longer have that right. You have until this afternoon," my father added, "to collect your things." Lillian didn't say another word, but her eyes, smug, gleaming, said enough. I stood slowly, pushing the chair back without a sound. "You won't get away with this. Grandfather would be disgusted by what you're doing." "Grandfather isn't here," Lillian replied softly. "And soon, neither will you be." I raced upstairs, heart pounding, mind spinning. I grabbed my largest suitcase and began packing quickly. Documents, clothes, and keepsakes. I was folding a sweater when my mother appeared in the doorway. "You're not taking anything valuable," she said coldly. "Everything in this house belongs to the estate now. These are my personal belongings. They're contested," she snapped. "Hand over that bag." I clutched the handle tighter. "No." Her face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful little snake. After everything we've done for you, you've done nothing for me," I said quietly. "Nothing but erase me." She screamed for my father. He appeared seconds later. "Give me the bag, Madeline." "No." In one swift, violent movement, he lunged, not for the suitcase, but for me. His hand tangled in my hair. He yanked, hard. Pain shot through my scalp as he dragged me through the hallway, past Lillian, who didn't flinch, and past staff who looked away in silence, down the grand staircase. My body hit each step, marble, wood, pain, through the front doors, into the rain. He shoved me onto the driveway. My suitcase flew beside me, bursting open, clothes scattered. Rain soaked everything. "You are no longer welcome in this house," he said flatly, adjusting his tie as if nothing had happened. "Any attempt to return will be considered trespassing." I sat there, trembling, hair wet, cheek bruised. "You think you've won," I whispered. "But grandfather was smarter than all of you." The door slammed shut. I was alone, in the rain, with nothing, except for a suitcase, a phone, and a promise I hadn't yet broken. Samantha arrived less than 20 minutes after I called. Her small blue sedan skidded to a stop just outside the estate gates. She stepped out, umbrella forgotten, rushing toward me with wide eyes and a breathless, "Oh my God, Madeline." She helped me gather what was left of my things: soggy clothes, broken heels, papers half washed in the rain. I couldn't speak, not in full sentences, not yet. The adrenaline that had carried me through the assault was gone, and in its place came silence. Samantha opened the passenger door, guided me in, and shut the world outside. She took me to her apartment, modest, lived in, and for the first time in days, warm. She ran a bath, found me dry clothes, sat beside me as I stared at the wall, too numb to explain. When I could finally speak, I told her everything: what they'd done, how my father had dragged me down the stairs, how my mother stood in the doorway and called it justice, how Lillian watched, not blinking once. Samantha's voice shook with anger. "They can't do this to you. You need to report him. That's assault." So the next morning, we did. We went to the local precinct. I sat across from a detective who raised an eyebrow when I explained who my father was. "Richard Carter of Carter Holdings." "Yes," I said, voice firm despite the exhaustion. And he dragged me down a flight of stairs by my hair. The officer typed slowly. Too slowly. "This sounds like a civil matter, ma'am," he said eventually. "Family disputes like this usually don't go far unless there's clear third-party witness testimony." I stared at him. So if a stranger had done this, it'd be assault. But because it's my father, it's a dispute. He shrugged. "I'll file the report, but don't expect much." And he was right. 3 days later, I received a call saying the DA's office had declined to pursue charges. Insufficient evidence, civil context, unwitnessed incident, words that meant one thing: nothing would happen. By then, I was already out of Samantha's apartment. Her landlord, somehow tipped off, threatened eviction for long-term guests. I tried to fight it. She said, heartbroken. "But they own the building. Mads. They said they'd evict the whole complex." So I left. The next few weeks blurred into a cycle of budget motels and near-constant anxiety. I applied for jobs, dozens. But every time I got close, something fell through. One manager pulled me aside after a promising second interview. "I don't know what you did to upset the Carters," she whispered, "but someone high up called and made it clear. We can't hire you." Word had spread. My name wasn't just blacklisted, it was poisoned. When my bank account dropped below $300, I pawned my laptop. It bought me 5 more nights in a roach-stained motel and a few meager meals. On the final night, I sat on the sagging mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering what would happen when I ran out completely. I thought about sleeping in my car. I thought about giving up. Then, out of desperation, I unpacked the suitcase I had thrown together in the chaos. I was looking for anything I could sell. That's when I found it. My grandfather's pocket watch. It was heavy, familiar. The last thing I grabbed the day they forced me out. I turned it over in my hands, tracing its surface, remembering the way he used to check it on our sailing trips. "A good watch," he once said, "is more than a timekeeper. It's a compass, if you know what to look for." There was something strange about the back plate, a faint seam around the edge. I pressed along it, following the rhythm he'd once taught me for opening his old safe. Click. The back popped open. Inside, folded neatly, was a small USB drive and a note, written in my grandfather's unmistakable hand. "My dearest Madeline, if you're reading this, It means the worst has happened. They've tried to take what's yours. I feared this day might come. This drive holds what you'll need. Proof. Evidence. Everything I prepared. Contact Martin Holloway. He'll help. I trusted him with everything. And now, I trust you. Remember, sailing against the wind isn't failure. It's the only way forward when the current turns against you. All my love. Grandfather. For the first time in weeks, I didn't cry. I breathed. Because the man who taught me to navigate life's storms had left behind the map, and I wasn't lost anymore. I stared at the USB drive, small and ordinary in my palm, but somehow heavier than anything I'd carried in weeks. My fingers trembled as I plugged it into the borrowed computer at the motel lobby, a machine sticky with fingerprints and smudged with age. The screen flickered to life, and what unfolded before me was more than I ever could have imagined. Files, dozens of them, audio recordings, medical evaluations, scanned documents, all labeled, time-stamped, meticulously organized. My grandfather hadn't just suspected betrayal. He had prepared for it with the precision of a man who'd spent his life building an empire from the ground up. The medical records were the first thing I opened, reports from his actual doctors, names I recognized, confirming his mental clarity up until his final week. There were transcripts of their conversations, too, notes detailing lucid decisions about the company, about me. Then came the audio files. One by one, I listened to recordings of my parents, voices cold and calculating, discussing how to push my grandfather out of the boardroom, how to restructure the trust, how to ensure Lillian maintains visibility. Their words weren't just proof of manipulation. They were strategy sessions, recorded in secret. There were emails between Lillian and Daniel Whitmore. Yes, the same Daniel who'd so confidently challenged the will, discussing ways to discredit me, including efforts to obtain retroactive medical opinions about my grandfather's condition. It was all there. But at the center of it all was a single contact, Martin Holloway. His name appeared again and again in the files, in emails, letters, and memos, always with trust, always with respect. A handwritten note, scanned and saved, was addressed to Martin directly. If they ever betray her, Martin, you'll know what to do. She'll find the watch. She'll find the drive. The rest is yours to protect with her. There was a phone number, an address. I called that night from the payphone next to the motel vending machines. The line rang 3 times before a voice answered, deep, measured, unmistakably familiar in its calm. This is Martin Holloway. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Mr. Holloway, this is Madeline Carter, Henry's granddaughter. A pause. Then, softly, I was hoping I'd never get this call, but I'm glad you found what he left you. Less than an hour later, Martin pulled into the motel parking lot. His pickup truck was dusty, worn from years of use, and spotless inside. He stepped out, tall, silver-haired, wearing a wool coat and a look of quiet sorrow. I knew your grandfather for 40 years, he said, offering his hand. He was the best man I've ever known. Let's get you somewhere safe. His farmhouse was 30 minutes outside Silverfield. Wide porches, creaking floors, warm lights in the windows. It smelled of pine wood and coffee. He offered me a guest room with a quilted bedspread and a fire already going in the stove. For the first time in what felt like ages, I slept without fear of the next knock on the door. In the morning, over black coffee and blueberry muffins he insisted on baking himself. We opened the drive together on his personal computer. As the files loaded, Martin's eyes narrowed. Henry thought of everything. He murmured. He always did. We spent the next 2 days reviewing documents, organizing them, and making encrypted backups. Martin had legal experience and enough financial literacy to understand the magnitude of what my grandfather had protected. On the third day, Martin made a call. "Time to bring in Charles," he said. "Charles Brennan. My grandfather's former business partner, retired now, but still sharp and, according to Martin, loyal to a fault." That afternoon, Charles arrived. He looked exactly like I remembered. Trim gray beard, tailored blazer, eyes that scanned like a strategist. As he sat down across from me at Martin's dining room table, he folded his hands and spoke with conviction. "Your grandfather trusted me with certain structural safeguards in the company, contingencies he put in place. Quietly. Things your parents don't know about. If you're ready to fight, Madeline, we can start." And in that moment, something shifted. I was no longer the granddaughter thrown into the rain with a bruised cheek and a broken name. I was Henry Carter's heir, and I was no longer alone. By the end of the week, Martin had arranged a meeting with someone he trusted completely. Archer Sullivan, a sharp, unshakable estate litigator who'd built his reputation by dismantling powerful families that thought they were untouchable. He was also, conveniently, the father of a former classmate. We met at Martin's kitchen table, the fireplace crackling softly behind us, and a stack of printed documents already waiting for his review. Archer listened without interrupting as I walked him through everything: the will, the forged medical reports, the concerns fabricated about my mental state. When I showed him the contents of the USB, his jaw tightened. "They weren't just unethical," he said quietly. "They were surgical, strategic, but they left fingerprints." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "They've built their entire case around one narrative that you manipulated a dying man who wasn't of sound mind. All we have to do is prove he was sharper than any of them." With Martin and Charles Brennan at my side, we built a team: forensic analysts, financial auditors, a private investigator named Marcus Daniels with a background in corporate fraud and a knack for uncovering things people thought they'd buried. The plan wasn't revenge. It was a restoration, not just of my inheritance, but of the truth. Marcus began his work quickly. Within a week, he returned with files that made Archer's expression darken with fury. "Your parents," Marcus reported, "have been hemorrhaging money for years. Lavish spending, high-risk ventures, real estate. They couldn't afford. They've been leveraging Carter Holdings stock for personal loans. And now, with the trust frozen, they're on the edge of collapse." He placed two documents in front of me. The most telling one: they used the expectation of inheriting your grandfather's assets as collateral on a loan just weeks before his death. I stared at the paper, the signatures, the bank name. They gambled with something that wasn't even theirs yet. "Exactly," Archer confirmed. "And when the will didn't go their way, they panicked." Marcus hadn't stopped there. He found proof that Lillian's gambling debts, over $300,000, had been wiped clean the day after I was thrown out of the estate. The payment, traced back to a corporate account that should have been frozen under probate restrictions. "She's complicit," Archer said. "Even if she claims ignorance, the timing damns her." Meanwhile, the handwriting analysis on the supposed letter of concern from my grandfather came back. The conclusion was clear forged. Worse for them. The metadata showed the document had been created 2 weeks after my grandfather's death, on a laptop registered to Daniel Whitmore's firm. The scandal was widening, and our case was solidifying. As we gathered the threads, Charles Brennan shared something else: an internal company document my grandfather had quietly amended just before his illness. It revealed a restructuring clause: any transfer of leadership within Carter Holdings required approval from an ethics oversight committee. That committee. It included 3 of Henry Carter's oldest confidants, none of whom had been contacted by my parents. "They've acted without proper authorization," Charles explained. "They've overstepped. If we prove misconduct, we don't just take back the company, we expose the full extent of their deception." Archer nodded. "And we'll do it in one clean blow." Each evening, I returned to the guest room with a mind full of dates, names, documents, and arguments. But beneath it all was something else: resolve. For weeks, I had been surviving, but now I was preparing. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was stolen, it was about setting the record straight. About ensuring the legacy of a man who had built everything from nothing was not tarnished by the greed of those who thought they were untouchable. And I would not enter that courtroom as a girl who had been dragged down the stairs and thrown into the rain. I would walk in as Henry Carter's rightful heir, ready for war. We filed the lawsuit on a Thursday morning. By noon, Carter Holdings' legal department had been served. By evening, the headlines had already begun circulating online. Granddaughter of Henry Carter files fraud suit against parents and sister. Alleges forgery. Asset misuse. Carter family implodes in courtroom battle over $80 empire. Within 24 hours, the probate court issued an emergency injunction freezing all disputed assets. No withdrawals, no property transfers, no quiet reallocations disguised as internal transactions. The empire my parents had treated like their personal playground was suddenly frozen in place, and they didn't see it coming. According to Archer, their lawyers scrambled. He received 3 calls that day, 2 from Daniel Whitmore's office, and 1 from a new attorney who had suddenly taken over the Carters' defense. Gregory Phillips was quietly stepping back, his name already beginning to stain. We had timed everything perfectly: the forged letter, the metadata trail, the unauthorized corporate transfers. All of it filed in one airtight, strategic blow. We submitted affidavits from grandfather's physicians confirming his mental clarity, a sworn statement from Patricia Lang, and perhaps most powerfully, the expert forensic report showed that the letter of concern was not only falsified, but created on a computer linked to the law firm itself. Then came the press leaks. Anonymous tips, originating from sources close to the investigation, highlighted the more personal details: Lillian's gambling addiction, the suspicious debt repayment, and the timing that aligned almost too perfectly with my removal from the estate. Financial blogs picked up the scent and began digging. It wasn't long before someone found out about the loan my father had taken out using the future inheritance as collateral. Now it wasn't just a family drama, it was a corporate scandal. Carter Holdings stock dipped 14% in 3 days. Investors panicked. Several board members resigned publicly, citing a lack of ethical oversight. And through it all, I said nothing. No interviews, no social media posts, no public statements, just silence. My parents, however, scrambled to regain control of the narrative. My mother released a statement to the press expressing deep pain over the unfortunate misunderstanding. My father claimed I had been emotionally unstable since the passing of our beloved patriarch, and Lillian, always the performer, gave an exclusive interview to a lifestyle blog, tears carefully cued. "I just want what's fair," she said. "This has torn our family apart. I never wanted this to go public." I watched the clip in silence from Martin's living room, the fire crackling beside me. Her voice was soft, her face is flawless, her lies practiced. "She's spinning sympathy," Martin muttered, handing me tea. "Let her," I replied. "We have the truth." The more they spoke, the deeper they dug themselves. Behind the scenes, our team kept moving. Marcus, the investigator, unearthed a new detail: the ethics committee clause in the company bylaws, quietly altered by grandfather, had been ignored entirely when my father and Lillian attempted to shift control. That clause alone, Charles Brennan explained, was enough to nullify every move they'd made since grandfather's death. Meanwhile, Archer coordinated sworn statements from staff members, those who had overheard conversations in the days leading up to my eviction. One recalled seeing Daniel Whitmore leaving the house with boxes of documents late at night. Another testified they were told not to speak with me directly and to report anything I did or said to Elaine immediately. My parents' desperation became more visible with each passing day. They called Archer's office multiple times with settlement inquiries. Daniel sent 2 formal letters suggesting a quiet resolution. I received 3 voicemails from my mother, 1 from my father, 7 from Lillian. I didn't respond. Their reach, their control, their manipulation. None of it mattered now. I had stepped out of the shadows they'd kept me in my entire life, and I wasn't going back. Instead, I focused on building the case. Every document, every date, every signature, every contradiction between their words and the evidence. Archer often said, "We don't win this with emotion, we win it with precision." And that's exactly what we were doing. The house they had tried to steal was now frozen. The company they tried to commandeer was under legal siege. And the story they worked so hard to script was unraveling. Thread by thread, in the court of public opinion. This wasn't just a counterstrike. It was the beginning of their collapse. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters. Camera flashes lit up like lightning against the gray November sky, and questions echoed through the crowd as I stepped out of Martin's car. "Madeline, do you have a statement? Is it true your grandfather was coerced? Are the Carters finished?" I said nothing. I just walked forward, shoulders back, chin lifted, wearing my grandmother's navy suit and the quiet steadiness my grandfather had once called my greatest strength. Inside, my parents were already seated at the front. Lillian sat beside them, face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. Daniel Whitmore had been replaced by a team of high-priced attorneys, none of whom could disguise the anxiety in their postures. Judge Eleanor Harrington entered with the kind of presence that silenced an entire room. Known for her uncompromising ethics, she didn't waste time. "I've reviewed the initial filings and preliminary evidence," she began. "Let me be clear. This court does not tolerate forged documents, financial manipulation, or the abuse of probate proceedings for personal gain." My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother didn't blink. The trial began with their side presenting first. Their lawyers painted a familiar picture. My grandfather, allegedly deteriorating, too ill to think clearly. They claimed, had isolated him, pressured him, influenced his decisions during a vulnerable time. They submitted the forged letter, cited expert opinions from physicians who had never met my grandfather in person, played the role of the concerned, heartbroken family. But their story was built on paper. Ours was built on truth. When it was our turn, Archer rose calmly. "Our evidence begins not with speculation, but with testimony," he said, "from the only people who were actually there." We called Dr. Yates, my grandfather's primary physician. Under oath, he stated clearly that Henry Carter was mentally sharp and entirely competent in the months leading up to his passing. Next, we brought forward Martha, the secretary who had witnessed the will signing. She described in exact detail how grandfather had read the will line by line, initialed each page, and insisted on 2 witnesses. He was focused, deliberate, and completely lucid. She testified. There was no confusion, only clarity. Then came Mr. Fletcher. Our longtime butler stood solemnly in the witness box. He recounted the day I was dragged from the house. His voice cracked when he described my father's grip in my hair, the suitcase exploding on the driveway, the silence of everyone else. "In 20 years of service," he said quietly, "I never imagined I'd see something like that. Not in the Carter household, not to Miss Madeline." The courtroom was still. Even the court stenographer paused. But the moment that shifted everything was the video. Archer approached the judge's bench. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we would like to introduce a final piece of evidence. A video recorded by Mr. Henry Carter, shortly before his passing." The lights dimmed. The monitor flickered to life. There he was, my grandfather, frail but unmistakably present. "I, Henry Carter," he said directly into the camera, "being of sound mind and firm judgment, make this recording to confirm the contents of my will and the reasons behind them." He spoke for nearly 20 minutes, about the company, about me, about the values he believed in: integrity, accountability, truth. He addressed the potential that others might challenge his decisions, and warned the court to listen to what I'm saying here, not the stories told by those who only remember me when money is involved. At the end of the video, he looked straight into the lens. "To my granddaughter Madeline, if you are watching this, know that I trusted you above all. You earned this legacy, and I know you will protect it with grace and strength." When the screen went black, there wasn't a sound in the courtroom. Judge Harrington leaned forward. "This recording," she said, her voice unwavering, "along with the overwhelming supporting evidence, confirms the validity of the will. The document submitted by the defendants is determined to be a forgery." She paused. "The court finds Richard and Elaine Carter, along with Lillian Carter and attorney Daniel Whitmore, responsible for fraudulent misrepresentation, attempted conversion of estate assets, and willful obstruction of probate." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. "All assets transferred during the disputed period are to be returned. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. And Mr. Whitmore," she added sharply, "you will be reported to the State Bar for ethics violations." My parents didn't look at me. Lillian buried her face in her hands. And for once, there was no script, no spin, no performance, just silence. As we walked out into the sunlight, Archer turned to me. "You didn't just win," he said. "You exposed the truth." And in that moment, I finally felt it. Not triumph, but peace. 3 days after the ruling, a new attorney, one I'd never seen before, called Archer's office. "My clients, Richard and Elaine Carter, would like to open a conversation regarding a possible settlement," he said carefully. "They're prepared to drop all appeals and publicly acknowledge the validity of the will." It was too late. But I agreed to meet, not for reconciliation, only for closure. The meeting took place in a neutral office downtown, a glass-walled conference room that offered no comfort, no history. My parents arrived looking smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in presence. The polish was still there, but the illusion had cracked. Lillian came separately. She sat at the edge of the room, a shadow of her former self. My father spoke first. "Madeline," he said, tone subdued, "we made terrible mistakes. We were scared. The business, it was failing. We didn't know what else to do." I met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "You dragged me down the stairs and called it protection." My mother dabbed her eyes with a linen handkerchief. "We were wrong. But we're still your parents. Surely that must count for something." I breathed in slowly. "It didn't count when you tried to erase everything grandfather built. It didn't count when you erased me." Then Lillian spoke. "They told me if I didn't go along with it, I'd be cut off, too. I was scared." "You were 28, I said quietly. "Old enough to choose decency. You watched them destroy me and said nothing." My father leaned forward. "There must be some arrangement we can reach. Name your terms." I looked at each of them, not with anger, but with clarity. "You'll leave the estate by the end of the month," I said. "You may take personal items, nothing more. The rest stays as grandfather intended." "And that's it?" my mother asked, stunned. "We'll be ruined." "No," I replied. "You ruined yourselves." They said nothing else. 2 weeks later, I stood in the foyer of the estate, my estate now, watching as they packed the last of their designer luggage into 2 modest moving vans. My father nodded stiffly as he passed me, but said nothing. My mother didn't look back. The silence felt like a door closing. And this time, I didn't chase after it. I stayed only long enough to walk through each room once more. The grand halls, the empty bedrooms, the study where I used to sit beside grandfather's desk while he explained how patience could outmaneuver power. Then I called the realtor. The Carter estate sold in under 30 days. I donated a large portion of the proceeds to a new nonprofit I founded, the Henry Carter Foundation for Business Ethics. Its mission was simple: support first-generation entrepreneurs and fund scholarships for young people from underserved communities who showed leadership, integrity, and resilience. Because legacy should not be something we inherit, it should be something we live. I moved to Boston quietly, bought a modest brownstone near the financial district, set up a small office just blocks from Carter Holdings. From there, under Archer's guidance and Charles Brennan's steady hand, I began the work of rebuilding the company. We revised our corporate charter, implemented ethical review protocols, shifted our investment strategy away from vanity ventures and into sustainable, long-term innovation. And every decision I made, I asked one simple question: would this make grandfather proud? In the boardroom, I no longer sat in the corner. I sat at the head of the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand respect. I earned it, one meeting at a time. And for the first time in my life, I was building something that was mine, not handed to me, not stolen, not defended in desperation. Something real, something rooted, and most importantly, something right. 3 months after the trial ended, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address, just my name, in a careful, familiar script. It was from Lillian. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to justify what had happened. Instead, she acknowledged it, every piece of it. Madeline, I understand if you never speak to me again, but I need you to know that I see it now. The way I treated you, the way we all did. I've started therapy. I've joined a recovery group for my addiction. My therapist encouraged me to write this, not to seek redemption, but to take responsibility. You deserved better. Grandfather was right to trust you. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Lillian. I stared at the letter for a long time, and then, slowly, I picked up my phone. We met at a small cafe far from downtown Boston. She arrived in jeans and a coat too thin for the season, with none of the designer polish I once envied. She looked smaller, softer, real. "Thank you for coming," she said, voice quiet. "I wasn't sure I would." I admitted, I wasn't sure I deserved it. We talked for hours, not just about the trial, or the estate, or even grandfather. We talked about childhood, about the pressure to perform, about how love had always felt like currency in our family, measured, withheld, never given freely. Lillian didn't ask for a second chance, but she returned something that surprised me: a pair of cufflinks, my grandfather's, the ones my father had pawned during the chaos. "I found them," she said, sliding them across the table. "They were never mine to begin with." And that's when I realized she meant it. I didn't forgive her that day, maybe not even now, but I believed her remorse. And for the first time in our lives, we spoke not as adversaries, but as two daughters who had been raised to survive, not to connect. In the months that followed, I allowed life to begin again. I found a rhythm: morning walks to my office, quiet evenings reading by the window, and then, unexpectedly, something more. His name was Jordan Taylor, an environmental engineer whose startup had been on our radar for a sustainability partnership. He was brilliant, grounded, and refreshingly unimpressed by the Carter name. I'm not interested in who you used to be. He said once, during a walk along the Charles River, I'm interested in what you're building now. With him, there was no performance, just presence. And through it all, I held on to something my grandfather had once told me, long before any of this began. Inheritance isn't measured in assets, Madeline. It's measured in courage, in what you're willing to stand for when no one stands with you. Now, I finally understood. The greatest thing he ever left me wasn't the company, or the estate, or the money. It was his faith that I would be the one strong enough to protect what truly mattered, not out of vengeance, but out of integrity. And I did. Some legacies are written in ink, others are proven in silence, in courtrooms, in choices made when no one's watching. I didn't just inherit a company, I inherited the courage to protect it. And maybe that's all grandfather ever wanted. If you've ever had to rebuild from betrayal or carry a truth no one believed, leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest legacy.